All right, everyone, we have relatively huge news within the U.S. political race, which is that Beto O'Rourke has actually dropped out. He's calling it quits. Now, I have to say, behind the scenes, if a person's not a complete dumbass, I think at least part of their speculation might be this is family related. Because when you wage a months-long, completely doomed death march style campaign, you're not getting any traction. At some point, that same wife you insulted and those same kids you forced to eat magic dirt because you're nuts probably begin to complain a little bit more than normal. And I can imagine there's a lot of complaining in that household anyway. You got a sad sack dad who's like doing the I was cool 20 years ago sort of thing, skateboarding and talking about hacking. He does these like cringy live streams. At some point, the kids get teased in school, and the dad feels bad if he's a dad at all, and, things go, I think, from there. Beto Orourke was never a viable candidate. Now, though, we have to play a game, and this is going to be a fun game. Beto Orourke, although he was never viable, did have at least a little bit of a block of support. He was riding around 3 or 4 points. Well, in a hugely crowded field, that puts him somewhere in the middle. Where does that support go? Because as the race thins, as fewer and fewer people are in the race, you get a consolidation of support behind others. Now, let's say that I'm a core Beto Orourke voter. I obviously don't have a problem with confiscating guns and breaking down people's doors in the middle of the night. So that'd be a far left platform. Now, he's also a white male and straight and has a family. He has kids and stuff. That's not a far left platform. That's to them it's a far right platform, which is funny for the Democratic Party. I'm going to take a wild guess and say Buttigieg may have just hit pay dirt. He may have just gotten the potential moment that he can seize upon, goes into the next debate maybe having leached off of Beto's support. It is possible because they're young, they're white, and they're male. Beto O'Rourke goes far left, Buttigieg is gay, which he doesn't talk about a lot, but it helps strike a chord with people on the left. He could, in theory, ride high on these new voters because they're obviously capable of forming part of someone's hardened fan base, because they stuck with someone who clearly wasn't capable of winning for months and months. Therefore, I think that they mostly go to Buttigieg. If they're ideological leftists, Kamala Harris might get a few of them, I would think, more on the open border side. I don't think Buttigieg is in favor of fully opened borders. That puts him in the far right category, according to the modern Democrats. Sanders might grab a few, and then Biden because of that aura of inevitability. I think that's probably where it goes, although if they wanted an insurgent outside candidate, some of it might go to Yang as sort of the next runner-up. He and Beto had been at the same level. Cory Booker's more lamestream politician. He's become an afterthought. I wouldn't expect him to be in very long. We've got to also play a second game. So that's in the game of where do the votes go, that's my short answer. And of course, I could be totally wrong. It could be that tomorrow he decides to say, well, I endorse Tulsi Gabbard, ha ha ha, throw a wrench in this establishment system. I was a hacker once in the 90s, and be really funny. Then we have to play a game called Who's Next to Drop Out, because Beto O'Rourke did have a funding apparatus. He did have a core fan base, and he did have, at least relatively decent crowds sometimes where he went. There are a lot of people in the field weaker than that. And unless they have their own personal fortune, they're not going to be able to self-fund forever. So, who's next? Any answers? You put in the description, you can tell me whatever platform you're on, who you think is the next to drop out. I'm going to say, let me give 2 because it's so crowded. I would say, of those that have a name in the race itself, Cory Booker would definitely be one of them. And I would say if she keeps having money problems, if she keeps losing support, Kamala Harris. Because her campaign being more establishment style is more expensive than maybe what a Tulsi or a Yang has, even if they're lower down. I would think, though, Cory Booker would come up as probably the most obvious next one of those that you would care in the race. Like, nobody cares if someone down, like, is de Blasio still in? There's another game you can play. Who's still in the race on the bottom half? Because half the time you don't even know these people exist. Steyer, de Blasio, Bloomberg, Oprah Winfrey. I don't even know exactly who's in the race at this point. Gravel was in for about a month and dropped out when he didn't make the first debate cut. It's funny because he's almost 90 and he was still one of the more sane candidates. And by the way, I think healthier than Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden combined at this point. It's funny because now he's sold out for Bernie Sanders. It's really sad to see. I think this gives a little bit more odds to Buttigieg to be able to cement a place in the field that keeps him viable much longer, which is something Kamala Harris didn't manage to do. But there was never any real viability for Beto. I mean, he was a cult of personality. It was a cult of personality moment. It was a lot like Ben Carson in a way, not polling-wise, because he never really peaked at all. Well, Ben Carson had supporters, but it was because of his attitude. It was because he seemed quietly spoken and sleepy and kind of cute for the cameras, and it was charming. It wasn't really any finesse. It wasn't his debating chops. They barely let him speak at the GOP debates that year, which is something even Trump admitted was a problem. I think others did too. It was more about his character. But everything else never really congealed. Sometimes you get the opposite. Sometimes you get a candidate, on paper they look eminently qualified, like a real slicked-back corporate candidate. You think of a Dick Gephardt sort of deal. They look the part, or Mitt Romney a la 2008. They look the part, they have the chops, but then it just doesn't coalesce because of a lack of character or lack of charisma. We've got some other people, I think, in the field that are like that. Cory Booker, again, comes to mind. On paper, he's got some qualifications. He can wear the suit right, so to speak, but there's just something about his personality and character that just doesn't sync up with trying to become the president of the United States. Kamala Harris, again, plays that role. Someone in their mid-50s. She's at the right age range for, the general population. She's capable of striking that right chord, but there's just something about her that rubs people the wrong way, which is why when she got greater exposure, she crashed and burned. Oddly enough, Elizabeth Warren may be doing that right now, and Beto Orourke, he was such a bad character as far as his ability to run. He never had either a really strong platform and something to put himself apart, or the personality. The problem is he was trying to pull himself apart from the pack and give a selling point based on that. When he skateboarded, when he broke down into Spanish, which Julian Castro was like, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, dude, it's not going to happen. He, by the way, might be another one to drop out fairly soon. I don't think Gabbard or Yang. I think they'll go in longer because they've got more bare bones campaigning styles. They can run on a shoestring budget. It's a little bit different. He never really, though, had the ability beyond cringe, beyond making a mockery of himself to get attention. The problem is every time he tried to do that, magic dirt, my family didn't want me to run, I skateboard, I hacked a computer once. All of these things, it was basically dad joke the campaign, wasn't it? Now, of course, Buttigieg doesn't have, I think, kids or anything like that, and he's in a gay partnership, which is a little bit different than maybe most of the Democratic candidates have. Cory Booker might be in a similar situation, at least not on paper, but I think that he absorbs the votes. I think Buttigieg primarily gets them, and I think some of them go to Biden, Sanders, some of the other people near the top, but I think he's the one that gets the most. Or it could be wrong, and it could be that everyone chooses like Yang or Gabbard. They decide to be insurgent core supporters. I just don't think it's quite as likely. That's about all. Peace out.